today of our Gemarah, but if all goes as I think it might, we will be dipping into various books of the Torah. We'll be taking a trip into the future, and you'll understand what I'm talking about soon. And we're going to learn all sorts of interesting things which have contemporary relevance. And now you know how much I love contemporary relevance when we're learning. So I'm going to make some hay out of that. So let me remind you where we are holding in the Gemarah. We are in Sanhedrin, first Perek, page 9a, Tet Amud Aleph, and we are discussing the case of how many judges are required for the defamer. And I remind you that the defamer, the Motzi Shem Ra, is the case of the husband that comes along and says that his wife was not a virgin on their wedding night. And then there's all sorts of proof that needs to be brought. And if it's turned out that this is a Motzi Shem Ra, this is a defamation of character, then there is a fine to be paid by the defamer of 100 silver shekels, an enormous amount of money. And the case that we're dealing is whether the requirement to hear this defamation case, either in terms of whether this was true or not, there is a dispute between Rabbi Meir and the sages. You will recall that Rabbi Meir says we need 3 judges only for this court case because it's a monetary case. Because the worst thing that can happen is that money will change hands. Either the wife will not receive her full ketubah, because indeed she was not a virgin on her wedding night, or the family, the father of the defamed woman, will receive 100 shekels silver fine from the perpetrator of the defamation, i.e. the husband. So it's all about money, says Rabbi Meir, and we only need 3 judges, because we know, don't we, from the very first words of the Mishnah, Dinei Mamonot Bishlosha. Monetary matters are dealt with by 3 judges. The rabbis, on the other hand, the sages, say, no, we need 23 judges, because it might turn into a capital case. If it turns into a capital case, how could that happen? Because she is found with witnesses and warning to have committed adultery prior to the wedding, but after the betrothal. And therefore she would be called a no'efet, an adulteress. And therefore she would be potentially liable to the death penalty. And if she is, but this could potentially turn into a capital case, then say the Chachamim, we need 23 judges to start with. We then had a sub-argument between Ulla and Rava as to what the dispute between Rabbi Meir and the sages was. Ulla said, we're worried that there may be gossip. In other words, when a monetary case comes along, somebody will come along and say, oh, actually, I can testify that this woman was not a virgin because I actually witnessed the adultery. And so we're worried, says Ulla, that is how it might become into a capital case. And what we don't want to do is to dismiss the judges and start all over again. Rava, on the other hand, said, we're not worried about gossip. What he says is we're honored about the honor of the judges. So if the case has to be changed from a capital case to a monetary case or a monetary case to a capital case, we don't want to be going around dismissing judges, because it will look like they're being discharged because they weren't fit to be judges. So we're worried about their honor. That was the argument underneath. But the main argument is Rabbi Meir and the sages. How many judges do we need for this case, 3 or 23? And what we've been doing in the last few weeks in the Gemarah is we've been trying to find out the narrowest possible case where they disagree. And various different Amoraim, various different characters in the Gemarah have come up with suggestions as to what the cases were. There was one suggestion that she wasn't warned, another suggestion that she wasn't warned properly, that she wasn't told what kind of punishment she would get, what kind of death penalty she would get. And there were various different suggestions to narrow down the disagreements, because that's the whole point of the Gemarah, is to try and get a consensus of what the halacha is. And so if we have dissenting opinions and we can narrow down that those two dissenting opinions to one crazy out of the way case, then we can be happy, because on all other cases we have agreement. And what we're trying to get is agreement. I know that sounds a bit weird in Jewish life to get agreement, because we can't, generally speaking, get agreement on anything. Open the window, shut the window, start at 8 o'clock, start at 8:30, put the mazgan on, don't put the mazgan on. We can't agree on anything. But that's not the way it used to be. We used to try, at least in the Gemarah, to get agreement as much as we possibly can. So where we are up to is Ravina. We're on page 46 in the Steinsaltz Gemarah. Let me share the screen with you. There we go. You should be able to see the Gemarah now on the page. Yes. Okay. So we're up to here. Ravina is now going to give what is the 6th attempt at a crazy case that these two opinions can disagree on. Ravina Amma. Ravina says the case we're dealing with is a case where, kagon, for example, shenimtza echad min ha'edim, it turns out that one of the witnesses, karov, was a relative, or pasul, or was disqualified from being a witness. Right. Now, that might be all the Gemarah we do on this page today, because we need to go and look at this whole situation, don't we? What disqualifies somebody from being a witness in a case, or in fact, a witness on a document? Anybody here ever been a witness on a legal Jewish document? Right, Johnny Halpern has. Okay. Now, what about you, Julia? Have you ever been a witness on a legal Jewish document? No. I could have promised you that was the case. Nor can Avril, because both of you are apparently women, and women are not allowed to be witnesses. I'm not going down that road today, because I think you know my views on that anyway. But we're going to talk about some other categories of people, and this is no association, by the way, of other categories of people who cannot be witnesses. Now, Johnny Halpern, who were you? On what legal document were you a witness?
A ketubah.
A ketubah, a wedding contract. Okay. Now, whose ketubah were you a witness on?
Well, they're not married anymore.
Okay, but okay, fine. We don't need to know the names. But it was not somebody that was a relative of yours.
No.
And the reason for that, and the reason I can say that with certainty, is because relatives are disqualified from being witnesses. Okay, and that's why it says here, karov. Turns out one of these witnesses that came along to this adultery that said, I saw it, was a relative of one of the two parties. And that disqualifies them from being a witness. Now, does anybody know where the source in the Torah is for a relative being forbidden to be a witness? Does anybody know the source for that? Anybody know that? Okay, it is from Parshat Ki Tetzei, which is Devarim, chapter 24. And I shall put it on the screen right now. There it is. Chapter 24, verse 16, Leo.
Fathers shall not be put to death because of sons, and sons shall not be put to death because of fathers. A man should be put to death for his own sin.
Okay, let's just stop there. So, lo yumtu avot al banim, ubanim lo yumtu al avot. Ish bechet'o yumato. Each man shall be put to death for his own sins. Now then, if I said to you, there was only the second half of that pasuk, Ish bechet'o yumatu, each man shall be put to death for his own sins, you would know, wouldn't you, that fathers cannot be put to death because of the sins of the sons, and sons cannot be put to death because of the sins of the fathers. You would know that because it says each man shall be put to death for his own transgression. So why do we need both halves of the pasuk? Why do we need the first half? If we only had the first half, you could argue that that's just talking about fathers and sons, and maybe mothers and daughters are different. Or maybe fathers and grandfathers are different. Maybe fathers and uncles are different. Maybe a nephew can be put to death for the son of an uncle, or vice versa. Who knows? From the first half of the pasuk, all you can learn is that fathers and sons are not responsible for each other's sins. However, from the second half of the pasuk, ish bechet'o yumatu, each man will be put to death for his own sins. You know the first half, you know, therefore, sons and fathers can't be put to death for each other's sins. Only for your own sin will you be put to death. So that means that the first half of the pasuk is redundant. And we can't have redundancies in the Torah, can we? Because the Torah never has a redundancy. There is nothing in the Torah from which we can't learn something. So we must be able to deduce something from this apparent redundancy of the first half. And what this teaches us, say the rabbis, is that a relative cannot be a witness in a capital case. And that's what this is talking about. Fathers shall not be put to death because of the sons' testimony, nor shall sons be put to death because of fathers. And that's the because of the father's testimony. Okay. So the rabbis expand that from fathers and sons and fathers to various different relatives. And we don't need to go into the various different relatives that there are, because there's a machloket in the Gemarah, which is, I think, over here. No, not that one. Here we go. This is on 27b in Sanhedrin. That's our trip to the future. I promised you a trip into the future. Okay. At current levels, this is a trip 4.5 years hence, when we should reach Gemarah Sanhedrin 27b. If you want to know what page it's on in the Gemarah here, 27b is on page, there we go, page 171. Page 171 in the Steinsaltz Gemarah. Okay, page 171 if you're looking there. I've got it up here on Sefaria. So here's the Gemarah, and it says, Mina hanimili, where have we learnt that the idea that relatives are disqualified from being witnesses? Where do we get it? This is a Gemarah in Sanhedrin, which we will be learning in detail in 4.5 years' time. So the Gemarah says, it comes from this pasuk, Lo yomtu avot al banim, ubanim lo yomtu al avot. The one that we just said before. Where is it? There it is again. Lo yomtu avot al banim, ubanim lo yomtu al avot. The Gemarah says that that's where we derive it from. And the Gemarah goes on to say, Talmud Loma, to teach you, to teach you that they will only be put to death for their own sins. Harei kvar ne'emar. But we've got in the same pasuk, ish becheto yumatu, a person will die for his own sins. Rather, ela lo yumtu avot al banim be'edut banim ubanim lo yumtu yamutu al avot be'edut avot. Like we said before, the Gemarah teaches us that this means that you can't be put to death for the testimony. And then we've got a question against that Gemarah, haven't we? Because there is a very famous pasuk, tells you where it is over here, Exodus 34:7, which says that Pokeid avon avot al banim, I will visit the sins of the fathers on the sons. Now, that's a bit difficult, isn't it? What does that mean? Let's have a look at that pasuk, by the way. Does anybody know, without looking, in what context that pasuk comes? Where are we told that God will visit the sins of the fathers upon the sons? It's caused us no end of difficulty, this pasuk, over the centuries, by the way. Where does that come from? You will all kick yourselves when I show you.
Michael?
Very good, Michael. Yes. Well, the aftermath of the Egel, actually. The aftermath of the Egel, the golden calf. What happened with the golden calf is that God said, wow, these people have done something really bad. I'm going to wipe them out. And what did Moshe Rabbeinu say? He said, don't wipe them out, because if you wipe them out, you can wipe me out as well. I don't want to be part of the whole thing. And he prayed for their forgiveness. Let me show you the psukim. You will recognize them. They come in Shemot, chapter 34. It's from the parasha of Kitisa, of course. And there it is. I'll take the blue out and I will read it to you. You will recognize this. We did not say it this morning, but we will say it. We will say it. We'll say Vav and Zayin. Won't say hey. We'll say Vav and Zayin starting again next Monday. Vayered Adonai bi'anan, vayityatzei v'mosham, vayikra b'shem Adonai, vayavor Adonai al panav vayikra, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Emet, Notzer Chesed La'alafim Nosei Avon V'Afesha V'Chata'a V'Nakei Lo Yinakei. Next words, Poked Avon Avot Al Banim V'Al Bnei Banim Al Shideshim V'Ribeim. So it's part of the psukim where we say the 13 attributes of mercy of God. We say every morning, or we say the first bit anyway, every morning in Tachanon, and we sing it before we put the Sefer Torah back on the morning of Yom Tov, and we say it in Slichot, Hashem Hashem Keil Rachum V'Chanon, and we read it on fast days. It's a very, very familiar psukim, these, aren't they? Poked Avon Avot Al Banim. He visits the iniquity of the parents on the children, Al Bnei Banim, and on grandchildren, Al Shileshim Al Ribim, to the third and fourth generations. So the Gemarah.
But there's an earlier occurrence of the expression, Johnny.
Go on.
In the Aseret Hadibrot that we read on Monday.
That's true. That's true.
The very first commandment.
That's true, but that's the Gemarah actually quotes this pasuk, not the one from Aseret Hadibrot, which is why I brought you over here. But you're right. The Aseret Hadibrot says, but they say almost the same words. Poked Avon Avot Al Banim. And it's caused us no end of trouble. Let's go back to the Gemarah in Sanhedrin. So they asked the question, you've just told me in Devarim, we've just learned that fathers don't get put to death for the sins of their sons, and sons don't get put to death for their sins of their fathers. But we've heard in Shemot, both at the Ten Commandments and after the Egel, that's not true. That God will visit the sins of the fathers upon the children and the children's children. And then the Gemarah says, a famous Gemarah here, and that says, Hatam, over there, somebody who is ochez, holds on to, grasps onto. This is where the children continue the bad behavior of their parents. So when the children continue the same sins of their fathers and their grandfathers, then they will get the same punishment of their grandfathers. Likewise, the opposite, those who do not adopt the sins of their fathers and they do teshuvah, as it were, and they manage, and this is not easy, they manage to break out of the family tradition of doing bad things, then they are responsible for their own actions. Now, I was talking about this with somebody this morning. It's a very, very difficult thing to break out of family bad behavior because you learn it as a small child. Those and it's true, I could never really get my head around this. It's still a bit difficult for me, to be honest, but it is absolute proven fact that the children of abusers are more likely than the children of non-abusers to themselves become abusers. Now, it's a bit counterintuitive because you would think, wouldn't you, that somebody who's been abused as a child by their parents would remember that horrible experience and say to themselves, I'm going to be absolutely meticulous about not treating my own children in the way that I was treated badly. But the fact is that that isn't the case. Statistics are very, very clear, and there's no fudging this issue. The statistics are very clear that children of abusers are much more likely to become abusers themselves. People who have been brought up in a family which is a loving family are much more likely to replicate that in their own lives. People who have been brought up in a family of thieves are likely to become thieves. People who have been brought up in a family of immorality are likely to have poor morals. And so those people who are able to break out of that and not to be ochez b'maaseh avoteihen, not to hang on to the bad behaviors of their ancestors, they are to be highly praised and to be rewarded. And so this Gemara is a very important Gemara, a very famous Gemara. So that's where that came from. So let's go back to our Gemara now. Let's go back to our Gemara. Where are we? There we are. Back in our Gemara. So a relative. Now, that Gemara just spoke about fathers and sons. But there is a whole list, and there's the machloket between the poskim as to which relatives are disqualified from being witnesses. Certainly all first-degree relatives, spouses of first-degree relatives, and there is a whole list of them, which I'm not going to go into now because it will be too much of a digression. But relatives cannot be witnesses. And the reason for that is not because they may favor the person, because it's the case, even if their evidence is against their relative, they are still disqualified from it. And there are all sorts of reasons for it, but be that as it may, relatives cannot be witnesses. Now, it also says, pasul, or who is disqualified from being a witness for another reason, not because they're relatives. Now, there is a Gemara also into the future, not quite 4.5 years, probably about 4 years into the future, in Sanhedrin, page 24. And it is on page 153 if you're following in the Steinsaltz Gemara. Daf Chaf Dalad Amud Bet 24b, which talks about this. Let's have a look at that. Does anybody know, before we go into the Mishnah, without looking, does anybody know where what the categories of disqualified people are? There are 4 categories of people that this particular Mishnah mentions. Anybody know what they are without looking? Any offers? Have a guess.
Too young?
Too young. Well, that's true, but that's not what this Mishnah is talking about. Let's get it straight. It can't be somebody who's not yet bar mitzvah. It can't be a woman, and it can't be a slave. Okay. Now, we can debate that at another time, because in my humble opinion, those 3 categories are not equal today, or maybe they weren't ever equal, but they were thought of being as equal, and women should be taken out of that category. If women can be high court judges, they can certainly be witnesses in my book, but that's a matter for another day, not for this particular Gemara. But we're talking about male adult people who are not disqualified by dint of being a child, a woman, or a slave, or mentally defective. Okay, so this is something that people do which makes them disqualified. Any guesses before we have a look?
A Cohen.
No. Why would you think a Cohen would be disqualified, Julia?
Only because he would be elevated, and maybe if he were the level of respect that he would be entitled to is
so you mean
unequal.
that his testimony would hold too much?
Mm.
That's an interesting concept. That his testimony would hold too much sway because he's a Kohen. That's an interesting thing. Actually, the Gemara is talking about completely the opposite, but I can see where you're coming from. All right. Anyone else want to have a guess before we have a look? All right, let's have a look then. I will share the screen with you and you can have a look. This is in Gemarah Sanhedrin, chapter Daf Chaf Daled Amud Bet, page 24b. Here's the Mishnah. Ve'elu hein hapasulin. These are the ones who are disqualified from being witnesses. And Rav Steinsaltz adds in, disqualified by the sages from bearing witness due to their unseemly behavior, as they are considered wicked individuals, guilty of monetary transgressions. And here comes the first one. Hamasachek b'kubiyah, a dice player. A dice player. In other words, a gambler. Somebody who gambles for money. Right? He's disqualified from being a witness. Now, this has modern day implications.
It's got a lot of modern day implications for all the people that play Kaluki and bridge.
Yeah, if you are playing for money, there would be an opinion that says you are absolutely disqualified from being a witness because you are a wicked individual. Most people, however, would say if you are playing poker or Kaluki or whatever, or dice, blackjack, whatever else you play, and you're just playing for coppers and it's just sort of not of really any great consequence, that doesn't fall into this category. There is an opinion that this is talking about professional gamblers. But you're absolutely right, Julie. There are opinions that say, no, anybody who gambles for money, who plays dice for money, I'm not sure whether a bridge and Kaluki and all those things would count, because the point about dice, I think, is that it is entirely random. But I'm sure there would be an opinion that says those people would be disqualified, because there's always an opinion looking to disqualify as many people as possible. But anyway, what's interesting is that this Mishnah says that gamblers, and certainly people who make their living from gambling, so professional poker players, professional gamblers, are disqualified from being kosher witnesses. Now, this has even bigger implications in the modern day, because there are many places, the UK being one of them, where gambling is permitted, bookmaking is permitted, casinos are permitted. These things are not permitted in Israel, although you can do it all online. But there are no land-based casinos in Israel. There is a
lottery, Johnny. The lottery is in Israel.
Lottery, yeah, the lottery is a form of gambling. That's true. There is, I understand, a ship-based casino just out of Israeli waters, off the coast of Eilat. I'm told. I've never been on it, but I'm told.
Not anymore, Johnny. It was closed down some time ago.
Oh right, okay. Shows you I'm a bit out of date then. You seem to know a lot about this, David.
David broke the bank. David broke the bank there.
So, what's important about this is not necessarily the people that are going to these places to gamble. What about the owners of these places? Because many of the owners of casinos in various places and bookmakers are Jewish. There was a very highly respected gentleman in Manchester who owned casinos. He's no longer with us. He was so highly respected that he was made a peer of the realm.
Lord.
He was a lord. He was a very, very special gentleman, a great Baal Tzedakah, a very great supporter of Israel, and he was the owner of a very successful string of gambling places, casinos.
Don't forget about Sheldon Adelson.
I'm not talking about Sheldon Adelson actually, but
no,
yes,
I'm saying don't forget about him.
Yeah,
almost every Jewish organization, particularly on the right, has benefited from his casino ways.
Correct. Okay, there's another example from the across the pond. The reason that I'm mentioning this particular one, Larry, is that quite a few of us on this shiur knew this man, Lord Leonard Steinberg, very well indeed, personally. And I think it would be very difficult to find anybody who would have something negative to say about this person. He was an extremely fine person in every way. He was the owner of gambling joints. So there would definitely be opinions that would disqualify him from being a witness on a ketubah, despite the fact that he was highly respected, despite the fact that he was, in my opinion, and in the opinion of everybody that I think that I know, a great person who did wonderful things. I don't know Sheldon Adelson at all. I don't know whether his reputation was as untarnished as Leonard Steinberg's. I've certainly read things about him which are negative. I don't know whether they're true or not. But I dare say that he's also a fine person in many ways. But he would be, according to some, disqualified from being a judge on the basis of this, being a witness, not just a judge, a witness, on the basis of this Mishnah. So one who plays dice for money, a gambler for money, is disqualified. And from this we learn that actually this is not the business for a good Yiddish boy. It is frowned upon by the rabbis to be involved in gambling. Next one, well, we can understand the next one very clearly.
It's a good business for a Jewish boy, though. Not a business for. What did you say?
Not a business for a good Jewish boy, but it's a good business for a Jewish boy. Yeah. Yeah. Now the next one, hamalveh beribit, somebody who lends money with interest. Now we know, don't we, from the psukim both in Vayikra and in Dvarim, that you are not allowed to, and also of course in Shemot itself, you're not allowed to lend money with interest. You have to lend money to your fellow Jews without interest, and that is said specifically. So how do we? Nobody lends money without interest in the commercial world, even in the Jewish commercial world. If you go to Bank HaPoalim or Bank Leumi and take out a loan or a mortgage or what have you, you will pay interest. So how does that work? How does that work? Because you're not allowed. First of all, that's an Isur Dioraita. It's a Torah law that you are transgressing if you lend with interest. And so bad is that transgression that you are disqualified as being a witness if you do it. So how do we get around it? How do we get around in the modern world? Of course, the origin of this halacha is that you should be giving interest-free loans to your brother who has become poor. We're talking about people who are of means and people who are struggling to put bread on the table, coming to them for a loan. It is cruel. It displays very bad midot, very bad character traits to take advantage of the poor. There are, I don't know if you have these things in the States, maybe Larry or Sharon, you can tell us. But certainly in the UK, we have things called payday loans, where people who are desperate for money because they can't get to the next paycheck, they go to these loan sharks and they are charged outrageous sums of interest. And of course, all it does is make them poorer and poorer and get them into bigger trouble. You have that in the States as well?
Yes, we do. And sadly, many of the payday loan companies are run by Jews.
Yeah. Similarly in the UK, I'm afraid to say. So that is what the halakha, that is the source, that is the matara, that is the goal, the aim of that halakha is to prevent that kind of cruel, unseemly, grabbing, wicked behavior of kicking a man when he's down, a man who is not necessarily a man, but I use that word broadly, a person who is struggling to literally make ends meet, to get to the end of the month before his pay comes through, and to take advantage of that desperation and charge outrageous levels of interest. That is exactly what this halakha is designed to stop. It is not designed to stop the normal, what for us is normal commercial workings of the world. And there is a way around this, which I'll talk about in a second. But the person who we're talking about, or the Torah is talking about, when it says, don't lend with interest to your brother, is the scenario that we've just described. The idea of the Torah, as we've said many times, is to refine our character traits, to make our midot more acceptable and more refined, to improve our morals and to improve our ethical behavior. After all, Judaism is meant to be ethical monotheism. This is one of...
on that point, Johnny, this was obviously a cause of anti-Semitism during the Middle Ages, the fact that Jews, one of the only professions they could belong to as a moneylender, and the fact that they were allowed to charge interest to non-Jews, but not to Jews.
Indeed, that was. It was one of the perversities, if you like, of not even just the Middle Ages, of the late Middle Ages as well, and even up into the modern era, that Jews were prevented from doing many of the professions and many other jobs. The jobs that they were allowed to do, they were allowed to be innkeepers and they were allowed to be money lenders. And then when they became money lenders, because that's all they were allowed to do, they were hated for being money lenders. And it's one of those sort of perversities, really, that we're pushed into a corner, and then we go in the corner where we're pushed in, we're blamed for being in that corner. It's a bit like what's happening now, really, in modern day Israel and with what's going on, but we'll not get into that politics right now. So the idea of not lending money with interest is, of course, to refine our character traits. If we are somebody who does lend money with interest in that negative way, then clearly our character traits are not suitable and are not trustworthy to be a witness. And that is why they are listed among the people who are not allowed to be witnesses. The next one, Mafriche Yonim.
Sorry, can you go back and explain about the banks, and really, which is very similar to Sharia law, isn't it?
It is. Where do you think they got it from?
And similarly, the reason that we were money lenders was because the Christians weren't allowed to lend money with interest, and that's why they let the Jews do it.
That's right. I mean, that's the part of the perversity. Why were we allowed to do it? Because we are allowed to lend money to Christians with interest. Christians, who are meant to keep the what they call the Old Testament anyway, are not allowed to they're not allowed to lend money with interest to Christians. So who's going to lend money to Christians? Jews. So Jews were allowed to be money lenders. And then they're blamed for being money lenders. So as we say, we were pushed into a corner, and then we are criticized for being in the corner to which they have pushed us. All right, the banks. How do we do it? Well, first thing is that we should know that the prohibition, the underlying reason for the prohibition is, as we have said, it's not to be cruel. It's don't become a payday loan shark. Don't behave in a cruel way to your brother. Your brother's on his uppers, as my father used to say. He's got nothing. He's down to his last million, right? He can't put food on the table, and you are not to take advantage of him. If you have spare cash, you must lend it to him without interest, because that is the kind thing to do. It's called a gemach. Does anybody know what a gemach stands for? What does gemach stand for?
Gemilat Chasadim.
It is, Johnny, Gemilat Chasadim, the performance of kindnesses. Gemilat Chesed is the performance of kindness, but it's a particular kind of kindness. Gemilat Chesed is a kind of altruistic kindness. So you will find that in many of the Jewish communities, particularly in the Orthodox Jewish communities and ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities, which are particularly good at this, there is a gemach, a gemilat chasadim, a organization for doing kindness, where you can get stuff, whatever it may be that you have a gemach for free. And it's an altruistic act. So, for example, you will find in most ultra-Orthodox communities, you'll find a gemach for just about everything. There's a gemach for food, obviously. There's a gemach for money. There's a gemach for wedding dresses. There's a gemach for simcha tables. You're making a simcha in your house. Then there's a gemach where you can go and borrow the tables and chairs for no cost. There's a gemach for a bris. In other words, somebody will put together a pack of everything that you'll need for a bris, all the dressings and all the pillow that you need and the chair and all that stuff. There's a wedding gemach. There's even a gemach in Manchester. There's even a gemach for a white tie for a chosen. Right? There's a minhag in many Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox communities that a chatan goes to his chuppah with a white tie. He is never going to wear that white tie ever again. And most of them don't want to waste their money on something they're never going to use again, quite rightly. So there is a gemach for a white tie. There's a kittel gemach. There's everything gemach. My kids used to make fun of it when they were little. They wanted to set up a gemach for we will come and break your Uncle Moshe records gemach, because the Uncle Moshe and the Mitzvah Men music was so awful and so dreadful that they were going to set up a altruistic gemach to go round to anybody who wanted it and to break their Uncle Moshe records. So there is a gemach for absolutely everything. And gemach means gemilat chasadim, and it is the absolute opposite of what this Issur is about. This Issur is about not taking advantage, and the gemach, the gemilot chasadim, is about doing things for people just altruistically, not for any gain whatsoever. The ultimate gemach, of course, is for money. You lend somebody money to set up a business. That is the ultimate in tzedakah, is to lend somebody money without interest so that they can go and set up a business and make their own living. Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. And that's the same idea, that you can give somebody money, but if you lend somebody money to set up a business, to train them into something so that they can make their own living, that is the highest form of tzedakah. One of the things that I'm particularly keen on is the Laniado Hospital sponsorship for nurses. Those of you who are so inclined, for a figure of around about, I can't remember exactly now, about 5,000 shekels, can sponsor the education of a nurse who is in their nursing school who can't afford the tuition fees. That is teaching a man to fish, and at the same time providing nurses for our country. If you want to do something altruistically in a gamach way, and you want to teach a man to fish, I recommend that that would be something that you might want to consider. It's something which I have done for the last few years and I've done in my mother's memory this year, and it's a tremendous feeling when you get the little certificate from the nurse who has benefited from the sponsorship with a little thank you card from them. It's something which is extremely precious. So that's something that I would certainly recommend to those who want to go down that road. So how do the banks get away with it? I'm coming to it, Julia, I'm getting to it. So you might not like it, by the way, but they get around it by doing what we Jews are really, really good at. And that is by finding loopholes. Okay, so what the most famous loophole that we find, that I suspect that most of you take advantage of, is the loophole of selling your Chametz Erev Pesach, because the Torah says you shall not own any Chametz for the duration of Pesach. You're not allowed to own it, not allowed to not just eat it, you're not allowed to own it. So what do? We sell it. We sell it to a non-Jew. Is it a real sale? Well, yes, it is a real sale, because if it isn't a real sale, it isn't a real sale, and you have transgressed the avera of not owning chametz on Pesach. So it is a real sale. Is it really, really, really a real sale? Well, I mean, I think you can probably understand that it's a real sale, but it's not a real sale, is it? It's a loophole. We do the same with the heter mechira for Shemitah, which I'll talk about in detail when we do the Shemitah shiurim. We sell the land. Those of you who hold by the heter mechira, we sell the land to non-Jews. And what we do with the interest of the bank is we have something called a heter iska. Now, heter comes from the word mutar, to be permitted. A heter is something which gives you permission. Iska comes from the word esek. Now, we've had that before. In our Gemarah, we had the expression b'mai askinan. What are we dealing with? And I told you at that point, when we came to that, of a modern Hebrew word called esek, which means a business. If you own an esek, you own a business. So heter iska is a document that you sign when you take out your mortgage with Bank Hapoalim or Bank Leumi, or whichever bank you have your mortgage with. You sign a form called a heter iska. And what that does is it turns the loan into a business partnership. So you are not borrowing money from the bank with interest. You are actually going into a business arrangement with the bank, which transforms the loan into a business deal. Now, part of the business deal is that interest is paid on this thing. And the reason that that's permitted is because, as we said earlier on, the whole point of this halacha is not to disrupt the workings of commerce. It's to prevent usury, to use an old-fashioned word, and a word which has been flung at Jews over the centuries, I should say. Usury. It's an old-fashioned word for taking advantage of people on a monetary in a monetary way. So lending high rates of interest is usury. So this halakha is to prevent that kind of behavior. It's not to prevent normal business loans, mortgages, or the like. So,
Johnny, I would argue that credit card companies charging 15-20% APR as they do when interest rates are below 1%, I personally think that's usury.
I think you're probably right, David. I think you're probably right, which may well mean that if you are using a credit card, which is a credit card company that is owned by Jews, or if you are a Jew who owns a credit card company, you may well fall foul of this halakha. I suppose, David, the truth is that it's a relative issue, isn't it? At what point does an interest rate become outrageous? Everybody knows that the outrageous 75, 150% APR rates charged by the payday loan sharks is usury. At what point it becomes usury, I suppose, will be open to interpretation. But I certainly agree with you in principle that companies who are charging very high rates of interest could well be falling foul of this halakha if they are owned by Jews. Yes, Johnny.
What about Jewish landlords charging extortionate rates for slum properties?
Okay, that's a different issue. That's not lending them money. That's bad behavior, and that is definitely not the kind of behavior that we would condone. To be a bad landlord and to charge excessive rent for rubbish properties is not the way to behave. But it's not lending money with interest. So it's a parallel sort of bad behavior of which the same idea would you could say, okay, tell me all the halachot which are involved in this kind of thing. It will be a parallel halacha. But here they're specifically talking about lending with interest. The Rabbanan, this is the Rabbanan, by the way, the poskim expand list of people who can't be witnesses. Here we're going to see 4. We're only going to do 2 today because we're not going to have time to do the other 2. But here there's 4 in this Mishnah. But
whilst we're on the subject, John, it said Rab Steinfeld said it's also issur to borrow money for interest.
It is. That's part of the halacha as well.
Oh, okay.
So again, if you are using a credit card at an extortionate rate, or if you're using a payday loan place which is owned by Jews, you may well be falling foul of this halacha. Correct.
Could we ask the lawyers, is there a legal definition of usury?
I don't think there is.
So it's a relative term, isn't it? It's one man's meat is another man's poison, I guess.
I was just going to say there are laws in the various states as to what percentage interest rate can be charged, and it often has to fluctuate with whatever the day rates are for, it's going to have to move. But there are definitely statutory rules, and one of the payday loan people are among those who are regulated. Pawn shops have the same issue.
Right, that's interesting. So the payday loan sharks, presumably, when they're charging more than this statutory allowed rate, do they get prosecuted?
Yes, I've represented 1 or 2.
Okay.
Nice Jewish people who were violating the rules.
And what happens? Presumably, the fines are not sufficient to stop them from doing it.
And they can close them down in doing it civilly as opposed to simply criminally prosecuting them, which was the situation with my client. I represented him on the criminal part. We resolved the matter with a very large fine, and then the government tried to shut down this whole chain of stores, and it was ultimately resolved, not to make this story too long, by them agreeing to come into compliance and basically being enjoined with the possibility of additional fines if they violated the injunction.
Right, so that sounds very positive, really, that actually there is in the States, therefore, an official fluctuating definition of usury. And it sounds to me from that story that it got teeth as well. One of the problems we have here in Israel, of course, I'm not talking about usury now, I'm talking about generally people who violate rules. The fines are so small as to make it worth their while to carry on doing the bad behavior and pay the fines. Building regulations, for example, is one that springs to mind. If you're going to have laws, they've got to have teeth. So that story is quite heartening, really, Larry. Thank you for sharing that.
Johnny, just one thing so that it doesn't sound quite as good as it is. Each state, this is not there may be federal laws, but each of the states have rules, and then it depends on how, whether the states, number one, will pass them, number two, will the attorney general or prosecutors go after people, etc. So it's going to vary widely throughout the United States.
Right, interesting. So that's again down to individual interpretation, isn't it? I suppose, and application.
Or individual enforcement, I would say.
Yeah. Application, enforcement. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's just finish this Mishnah by saying the last two categories of people who are disqualified from being a witness, and then next week, please God, we'll go into these in some detail, and maybe we will give you out all some homework to do. So the last two categories, first two we've dealt with, dice players and interest chargers. The next one is pigeon flyers, mafriche yonim, those who fly pigeons, v'sochare shviit, and those who trade in Shemitah produce. So that sounds like it's a serious business, and we'll talk about that as well. So homework for next week. I want to know why pigeon flyers and traders in Shemitah produce should be so naughty, or considered so naughty, that they are in the category of those seemed to be so bad that they are disqualified from being witnesses. And then once we've done that, we'll go into the actual modern halachot of who is disqualified, and I shall tell you a personal story that I was involved in. So we will stop there. And any comments before we close up? I did say that we would go on a mystery tour, and we've been a mystery tour into the future and into the past today. And we managed to do about 4 words of Gemarah.
I did just want to say one thing that's just that's relevant to English law from what we did at the beginning, which was about family members not being able to be witnesses on documents. When I was doing conveyancing, and we always used to have a standard letter that said, please write your name, and your signature should be witnessed by an independent adult witness who is not related to you. We actually learned about, just before I retired, that wasn't true. And actually, a spouse could, I think there was a case that said this, that a spouse could witness their spouse's signature to a formal document. And so the law in England does not reflect this. I thought that was quite interesting. Really.
That is interesting. So basically what people have done, I suppose, is put that in for themselves to prevent any sort of problems that could be down the line. Do me a favor, make it somebody independent. I don't want any issues, even though actually legally it was allowed.
It would be okay. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
The same is true in the US, and I think one of the reasons is undue influence from the relative, particularly for an
Yeah.
older relative. But even though that's allowed, there are some jurisdictions that don't allow the keeping of pigeons and the flying of pigeons if they're for racing or for other uses.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to hearing that next week, Larry. Excellent. Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Any more comments before we go? Okay, in that case, Shavuot Tov. Speak to you soon.
Thanks. Thanks,
Shavuot
John.
Tov. Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thanks, Johnny.
Top, thank you.